almost everyone here, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone for coming and welcome to the Rulemaking Advisory Committee meeting on child care facilities within dwellings and automatic sprinkler requirements. My name is Tyler Glaze and I am here supported by other members of the Building Codes Division. I'm a policy analyst with the Building Codes Division working on this issue. With me also is Tony Rocco, the Structural Program Chief, who is here to answer all of our technical questions and as a very useful resource. And so we will start off today's discussion by welcoming everyone. Thank you again for coming. And I just want to start by discussing some background of this issue and dive into our first issue. So in Oregon, both registered and certified family child care homes defined by ORS Chapter 329A were previously governed by the Oregon Residential Specialty Code scope prior to the April 1, 2021 code adoption. These child care facilities are permitted to have 10 and 16 individuals receiving care respectively, which is double and more than triple the national model code limitation of 5. As of April 1, the care facilities were made to comply with the Oregon Structural Specialty Code, but were assigned a less restrictive Group R3 designation. This designation was intended to prevent the more robust standards required for Groups I and E from being applied to these care facilities, while still allowing the increased number of care recipients, i.e. 10 for registered family child care homes and 16 for certified child care homes. These amendments were discussed by the OSSC Technical Review Committee, appointed by the Building Code Structured Board and the public during several public meetings. Modification was suggested during the committee process via public testimony, child care facility public proposal, and the modification focused on providing an exception to the requirement of a domestic residential sprinkler system. The committee was in unanimous favor of providing exception to the automatic sprinkler system requirement. Child care facility public proposal modification to remove the automatic sprinkler system requirement was used as the basis for the new language, and the new language added several elements. First, it specified care facilities as locations within a dwelling. Second, it clarified language regarding intervening spaces along the occupant's path to an exit. And lastly, it clarified requirements for documentation, verifying facility licensure approval to receive a certificate of occupancy. In addition to the language in the child care facility public proposal related to the age of the care recipients was removed. And on January 26, 2022, the Building Code Structures Board approved the proposed rule language and revised code language and forwarded them to the administrator for rulemaking and subsequent adoption. Temporary rules were adopted on January 26, 2022, and temporary interim amendments to the 2019 OSSC were published at the link in your packet. So please be aware as we go through these issues, we have several attachments down below the list of issues as they apply to the various things we'll be discussing. Please feel free to reference them at your leisure. And the first issue that the Building Codes Division would like feedback from this committee on is, do the proposed rules accurately implement the existing temporary rule and board-approved code amendments regarding when childcare businesses are not required to install sprinklers? So just as a matter of housekeeping, if you could please use the raise hand function if you can. Otherwise, just please try not to step on each other and let any individual who is commenting finish their comment. But just to discuss this issue, the proposed rules make permanent temporary rules adopted in response to proposals received during the adoption of the 2022 OSSC approved by the Building Code Structured Board. These rules will amend current OSSC by implementing board-approved child care facility code language changes. Changes include amending and providing exception to the requirement that child care facilities located in dwellings require automatic sprinkler systems if they meet certain requirements, and clarifying occupancy groups for child care facilities located in dwellings, and permits them to be constructed under the standards of the ORSC, as long as accessible design is provided to the extent required. So the division welcomes any feedback. So do we have any individuals who wish to speak on this matter?
I was wondering with this question, are you asking if the permanent rules match the temporary rules? Because they match them exactly. So Or are you saying are the temporary rules that we've been trying to use for the last, couple months working?
Thank you for that question. A good explanation of this issue is, do these rules accurately implement the board approved amendments? So basically, are we accomplishing what we set out to do with these rules? Essentially, when they're adopted, do they effectively accomplish what the board was trying to do? And do you feel they're accomplishing the goal of removing the requirements?
I'd like to hear from some other folks. Here, I can give you City of Portland's experience with this piece.
Please do.
So one of the difficulties we're having trouble with is the documentation piece. How like the timeline of the licensing and the timeline of the building permit and what sort of documentation to get during which portion of the process. So actually, Abby and I talked with each other earlier this week about what kind of documentation they have available earlier in the process. It turns out that I believe it's certified family homes have a pre-inspection, pre-certification visit with a form, but the registered homes don't have that piece of the process. So we have a issue there. So even if that was something we were looking to try to collect during permit review, one set of the childcare homes have it, one set don't. But what it sounds like that documentation really wants to be is something at the end that says that the licensure is complete, but that piece is not complete until their building permit piece is complete. So how do those, like, what are we looking for? How would that work? And then the final difficulty with that piece is that it is a 1-year renewal or a 2-year renewal. So the piece of paper or whatever documentation we get with that first building permit, how would we keep that up to date? Because a building permit is like one and done. You don't do it again until they do some other work in the building. And then another piece kind of separate than that is tricky for us is, does it require a building permit? Under the scoping of the residential code, it talks about change of occupancy requiring a building permit, but is this really a change of occupancy or not? Certainly in the prior to last year, we weren't requiring building permits for childcare to come into any of these homes. So that's a whole new cost and process for any of the providers, regardless of what kind of improvements they might need to make, just the fact they're going through that process. So some sort of clarification maybe from the board or in the rules about, are we supposed to be seeing a building permit for an existing structure that has new childcare facility in it? Or is that something that doesn't need a building permit? And if it doesn't, then how do we have a certificate of occupancy with a piece of documentation attached? I have lots of other comments, but I really want to hear from others.
Thank you for that comment.
Recording in progress.
Do we have any other comments that would like to discuss that?
This is Annalise. I'll put my video on. Sure, I have a lot of comments. First and foremost is the fact that we are now behind the 8 ball on these regulations. And I'm just going to discuss everything because I don't really feel like most of what I have to say fits within any one of the 1, 2, or 3. So first of all, under 305.2.3, the fewer 5 children in a dwelling unit, where you added the 1 or 2 family dwelling unit for the licensed family, the RFs, which were the 10, and the CFs, which were the 16. I think that section 420.11, that part with the 1.1 and 0.2 with the sprinkler or the alternative, that part is very clear and it's very short and it's very easy for people to understand. However, accessibility is provided in accordance with the applicable provisions of Chapter 11 for the function served. Chapter 11 doesn't actually address childcare specifically. And how is anyone, including a local building codes person, I've talked to about 6 different local building codes people around the state, It ranges, the responses I've gotten have ranged from, I have no intention of even delving into this. I'm too busy, and we don't care if people are doing childcare in their home because they're allowed to. That's what the state does. To, I don't know, we're going to have to figure this out. And then on the high end, like in St. Helens, where the local municipality went way overboard and said everything in Chapter 11 basically applies. And now providers are being told they have to have handicap parking and accessible parking. They have to have automatic doors. They have to install in their homes, which is the primary purpose of their occupancy anyway, right? Is from a place for my family to live. That they have to have lighted exit signs, and they have to basically make their home look like, under this accessibility, a commercial building. And some folks are being told that they're going to have to find a way to widen hallways, widen doors, especially into their bathrooms. They have to find a way so that accessibility, like if you come in to a split level home and you can go up or down, but there's nothing really except an entryway, they're going to have to figure out a way to get people that are wheelchair accessible up and down. So that is, to me, that just blows my mind. A group R3 occupancy is defined by the state. All of the R1 through 4 are where the primary purpose is someone to be living, to occupy the property. This is a homeowner who's doing childcare in their home. This is not very different than a lawyer having people come in, or they're there temporarily. The definition under 329A of childcare is that a childcare facility has children coming in for care in absentia of their parent or their parentis loci, and they are there for part of a 24-hour day. None of our clients are residential, unlike foster care, elder care, people with disabilities. So that is very difficult to swallow as a childcare provider. When we talk about Chapter 11 for the functions served, in Chapter 11, it talks about separate spaces must meet the accessibility. But if you're a family childcare provider, pretty much your entire home, and the Department of Revenue and the federal government, if you're filing Form 8829 for tax purposes, certify and recognize that your home is shared space. Your kitchen, for example, is used by your childcare program, and it's used by the occupants in the home. So how that is to navigate Chapter 11 seems incomprehensible and, quite frankly, impossible. I'm still, despite that, I've asked ad nauseum, and didn't understand, didn't know, wasn't given the opportunity by state building codes to even be present, or none. There was no childcare provider that ever gave any feedback or testimony. These were done very quickly, very quietly, with the early learning division and the governor's office compliant with it, in collusion with. But what is the point and the purpose and the intent of moving us to the Oregon Structural Specialty Code, only to designate us as R3, to kick us back to residential code if we comply with Chapter 11, which is pretty much doggone impossible. And then we either have a sprinkler system, or let's talk about 420.112. The first item, all rooms where childcare is provided shall be located on a level of exit of discharge. That is not always possible. And quite frankly, many of us would be grandfathered in like a basement or a split level or something like that. So why would you want to, if it's already being done and we're grandfathered in, what is the point of saying it can't be done in new homes, or providers that have already been living in their home, and then they have to be compliant with that, or they have to have a sprinkler system? That just doesn't seem logical. No exit path shall be located within 3 feet horizontally of any permanently installed cooking appliance. Okay. So what you're saying is what we're supposed to, if we have a kitchen exit, like maybe out to our garage, what do? We board that up. We're not supposed to use that. I mean, if that's the safest path and that's the most expedient path out, we're not allowed to use that exit anymore to get kids out safely. We're supposed to go closer to a fire to exit out of where we're not within a cooking surface. No, and we cannot required to be passed through a storage room or through a room that can be locked to prevent egress. I hate to tell you, but I am required by the Early Learning Division to lock one of those rooms. It's called my laundry room. And that is one of my exits. I have to have a hook and eye or a lock of some kind on that door because I store chemicals that must be under lock, and a lock, not a childproof lock, but a lock. So in order to comply with this, number 2, 420.11.2.2, you would have to literally, from the get-go, certify, sign off that you are not, in fact, going to comply with the standards set forward by the Office of Child Care and Licensing in order to comply with this to avoid the sprinkler system. That puts providers in a catch-22. And it's going, this number 2 is going to basically ensure that no home that someone is going to move into is ever going to be able to comply and is always going to have a sprinkler system. So if that is in fact the truth, that no one is ever going to be able to use 420.11.2, they're always going to have a sprinkler system. That doesn't seem like much of a workaround. Additionally, in the number 3, as the Portland Building Codes person just indicated, this is a catch-22. This is a complete catch-22. Documentation shall be submitted to the building official, which states that all licensure requirements have been met by the facility. That doesn't happen until after you have already complied with building codes. There's no statement that we can give a building official that says we're compliant with licensure requirements until the second piece is triggered here, which is that the facility has that certificate of occupancy, which most of us have never needed before. And so in order to get the certificate of occupancy, if I need the certificate of occupancy, I have to have that before I can get licensed. And if I have to get the certificate of occupancy before I can get licensed, I can't show that I'm in compliance with the licensing requirements because I can't get that sheet signed off on, and I can't get my approval until I have the certificate of occupancy, which essentially closes down anyone's opportunity ever again to open a child care program. And the certificate of occupancy, I have to prove that I'm compliant with section 111.2, right? Section 111.2. So then I have to have a certificate of occupancy and an inspection, which 329.8 said I never had to have. And I don't understand how you can pass an administrative rule, temporary or this one, which is seriously in opposition to 329A, a law that already exists. So what this does is basically forces then every childcare provider, this rule right here forces us all to have to go out and get occupancy permits. And now you've got counties, anytime they find out that they've got a childcare, some counties, not all counties, finding out that they have a childcare program, and they can now collect this $750 fee down in Lynn County for an occupancy permit. Despite the fact that the provider has lived there for over a year, they now want an occupancy permit. Or they're threatening to shut her down. That makes no sense. No sense at all. And I see the comments, I see what's being said, but this specifically says that in order to not have to do a sprinkler system, it says no exit access path shall be located within 3 feet horizontally. And through a room or a storage area that can be locked to prevent egress. And so while one county might say, well, we won't need that. And I would argue that that county has already said that they need this from another childcare provider. that means we can't comply. And 329A and my rules 414, 000 through the end, my certification rules say that I have to comply with all laws and rules. So to me, I mean, first of all, to pass this off to OSCC and say that we have to have a building or an occupancy permit, excuse me, a certificate of occupancy, all that is doing is generating fees. And quite frankly, for the provider that was in Lynn County, that occupancy permit was her entire month's income for one child. That is not sustainable. Some counties have higher occupancy permits. Some of us have lower occupancy permits. To put this on the counties, especially like I've heard from Klamath County, right? Klamath County is like, well, we don't have time to go out and do this. We're just going to kind of, just let it kind of fall. That is inconsistent applications. That puts a heavier burden, especially on providers who live in suburban areas where the county does intend to enforce this. So I don't know, I guess, and it's never really been fully explained, right? Who is being saved in this situation? I mean, childcare providers have been for over 100 years, family childcare homes have been exiting children and practicing drills every month. And I mean, I just don't get where the evidence is that suggests that we need to go to this level. Who is it saving? How is this going to save anyone? And what evidence exists that it's even needed? And those are questions that I had an opportunity to participate in a public meeting, and there were two of them back in April of 2020, well, prior to or in April of 2021. Had I had any notification or any awareness through my union or individually or independently, I would have shown up and I would have asked those questions then. Now, I went and threw a big stink. Our local union, Childcare Providers Together, threw a big stink. And then our AFSCME council came to you guys and you issued this bulletin, which only made things worse, especially down in the city of Albany and in St. Helens. So, I'm sure I'll have more comments, but that is basically the meat of what I wanted to express today. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Do we have anyone else that wishes to speak on this issue? All right, I am not hearing anyone else. So as part of this discussion, there are several options that are available to the Rules Advisory Committee if they would like to decide on those. Obviously, if individuals feel strong about one way or the other, they can speak on these options. First option would be the proposed rules and OSSC code amendments do accurately implement the temporary rule and board-approved code amendments. The second option would be the proposed rules OSSC code amendments do not accurately implement the temporary rule and board-approved code amendments. And obviously, we would need some explanation as to how they do not do that and how we can adjust on that basis. So if anyone would like to provide any other recommendations on if they believe they do not accurately implement the temporary rule and board-approved code amendments, they could explain how that might be the case, or whether or not they believe that the proposed rules and code amendments do accurately implement the temporary rule and board-approved code amendments. And also I will welcome any comments on the first issue as well. And Stephen Cass, please.
Yeah, I think the options being offered today, I understand you guys have procedure and protocol, and I get that. I guess I would vote no because I'm hearing concern about adoption of these rules. We had the experience, I work with Jody at the Bureau of Development Services, City of Portland. We had the experience of trying to implement mostly the smoke detector, or excuse me, the fire sprinkler requirements for adult care facilities. And we don't do a systematic inspection of, while we do with adult cares, we don't do it with child care facilities. We don't have that set up. And I don't think we want to, and we're not staffed for it. I think some of the questions being asked about whether there is going to be a change of occupancy required here are extremely important to resolve. And I agree that it's a lot to ask an owner to do. Finances were a real issue, both for child care facilities and adult care facilities. So we found that a lot of the fire sprinkler systems drove water service upgrades, which were very expensive, drove SDC fees. An alternative that was tank type installations that also had a lot of expense associated with them. So I understand this is trying to get a way around that for child care providers, but the documentation piece, how jurisdictions are supposed to do that, and the consistency of how we do it is extremely important. Otherwise, this will be felt very disproportionately throughout the state. So I don't know quite where that fits, but I would say no, let's go back to the drawing board. The other question I'd like to ask is, it's not clear to me what drove all of this fire sprinkler. Was it an exercise mostly to create code alignment because it maybe was felt that this exception that used to be in the ORSC was not a good way to go? Were there a spate of fires that we were somehow responding to? I didn't get the sense that either of those took place. So when we create policies like this that really do impact people very seriously, especially in an industry where the margins are not high for the providers, either in adult care or child care, what is the problem we're trying to solve? Is it a problem of trying to just reconcile the code requirements so that we can feel like those are more congruent just from an administrative standpoint? Or is it because we really have seen some serious safety issues? Obviously these are populations of concern, but to me, that doesn't necessarily mean we've seen conditions that would argue for the kind of expense and administrative adjustment that's going to have to go on statewide. So I would say no. Let's go back to the drawing board in these rules.
I appreciate your comment. And do we have any other individuals connected who wish to speak on this issue? Annalise, I believe you raised your hand.
Yeah, I just following up on what Stephen had to say. I think that we need to, one of the things that we could look at, right? So a solution for this would be that residential, the primary purpose of the home in an RF, registered family situation, would be in fact the person living in the home. And 329A childcare rules require the childcare provider to reside in that home. So to me, that doesn't meet that doesn't meet the R3. And what we've heard from some folks who've been trying to get registered family license is that their local municipality is saying, well, you're not changing the use of the home. It's a home, and you're doing childcare in the home as a family childcare, not as a commercial entity. So we wouldn't issue you an occupancy permit because you're not changing the use of the home. The home is, you live there and you're bringing some kids in. And I hate this word, but the local municipality says you're bringing these kids in to babysit them, right, for some period of time during a day. So that's not you're just doing something in your home. For the certified family child care provider, you do not have to live in your home unless the local municipality, the local government says you have to live in your home. And I guess must be like, I think around 60, 70% of municipalities require the child care provider to live in the home. And so the person who's on the license is living in the home. Now, some places or some providers who get around this own the child care and their name isn't on the license, but somebody else's name is on the license. And even that person is not living in the home, and there's no one living in the home, which then begs the question, is it commercial entity, or is it, because the very definition of being an in-home childcare provider is that you are doing childcare in your own home, right? That's the presumption. So one of the things that we could do is we could say that if you aren't doing childcare in a residence, so no one's living on the property, then number 1.1 or 0.2 apply. But if the primary purpose of the home is that you and your family, whatever your family unit is, live in the home, and during some part of the day, you do childcare in the home. Because let's face it, licensed family childcare is not centers. Licensed family childcare is not a large scale operation. 16 kids may seem like it, and you have a couple of staff, but it's not a large scale operation. And it is not foster care. It is not a group home. And it is not elder care. It's not residential care. It's not rehab. It's not, a halfway house. It's not any of those things where people are coming and they're living there. So the clients occupy the space. And I think that's an important distinction to make. So I would argue that none of us really should, that this all should just be scrapped. The temporary rules should just be gone. And get rid of the other stuff too, that this never should have happened, and this was a huge mistake. But if you really want to keep what you passed back in April of 2021 at state building codes here, then I think that the solution is that there's an amendment made to the base language that was passed in April that says that dwellings that are used for childcare where there is no resident of the facility shall be designated R3. And the rest of us who are living there, and that's the primary purpose of the home, is that I live here. There are 6 of us living in my home, right? My kids, and they're almost all adults. I have one that's a minor child, but there are 6 of us living in this home, and I run daycare for part of my day. Certainly the care is less than, most days is less than 12 hours, right? So less than half of the day. And I generally do not do childcare on the weekends. So on Saturdays and Sundays, the whole 24 hours is my home, right? It's just where we live. On holidays, there's nobody in care. So the majority of the time over the course of the whole year, or even in a week, the majority of the time is that the primary purpose is my residence. So if you want to do something, I think the workaround should be that if there's no one living in the home and it's only being used for business, then that is a change of occupancy. That would require and trigger the R3. But the rest of us who are living here and the primary purpose is our homes, scrap it.
All right, thank you for those comments. And just as another housekeeping matter, if anyone who's connected here today could refrain from using the chat function, those don't get captured by the record. If you have something you'd like to add in terms of a comment, please feel free to raise your hand and do so. That would be greatly appreciated. And do we have anyone else? Jody, would you like to say something?
Yeah, I was just thinking that maybe we might be looking at these out of order. So the one that everybody seems to be talking about with scrapping it and all that is the piece, I I think it's under number, well, it was the part that was like, what is it clear in the scoping of the ORSC about what should be moved out of the ORSC? Is that, I don't think that is on the table as an option to reconsider, because what I don't want is for these temporary rules to go away and for us to then have to go back to where we were before January with enforcing sprinklers in every childcare home. The temporary rules, what they have allowed us to do is not require sprinkler systems in more cases. In most cases, although I hadn't heard until today about the other pieces that Annalise was talking about that were a conflict with the licensing and the locked rooms, I think. But so scrapping and going back to December does not seem good. If we are 100% going to be moving forward with these don't get to be in the residential code except through some sort of set of rules, it may be more productive for this group to talk about what those allowances would look like so that it works for the licensing group, the child care providers, and the public using these services. What would those rules look like to be workable?
I appreciate that. And Annalise, are you raising your hand again?
Yes. So I wasn't necessarily saying scrap the temporary rules. I was saying that what we need to do is go back and look at what was passed in April. And I understand that that's not what you opened necessarily with state building code, but I think that needs to be the consideration. So what we could do, what then I would suggest, right, is on 420.11.2 that without automatic sprinkler system protection, where an automatic sprinkler system is not installed throughout the fire area of the dwelling where a childcare facility is located, all of the following shall be met. 1, 2, and 3 are not going to work for a lot of programs. If I was moving into this home that I live in right now, 1 would not work. 2 would not work. And 3, depending on, again, which is not clear, what accessibility I would have to follow, would likely not work. And I don't even know that I could get a certificate of occupancy because I'm not changing my use of my home. So there's got to be different alternatives, but these won't cut it, because for example, for number 2, my only exit that can go to that is at the level of exit discharge. The only one that actually works is through a room that has to be locked. Now I can easily unlock it if I need to escape through that door, but that's not my primary door that's used, and it's not on level of it's the only one that is actually on level of exit discharge.
So maybe one fix with that locked piece to clarify, I think that the intent is that it can't be locked against the direction of egress, right? Like you could lock it from the inside where you're trying to get out, but what we don't want is for a lock to happen on the outside of the door so that somebody inside couldn't unlock it. Does that sound accurate to what the intent of the writing of that one was?
I can defer to Tony Rocco if he has anything to add on that issue.
Yeah, thanks, Tyler. Absolutely, Jody. That's the intent there. And all 3 of these items were developed with ELD. So we worked very closely with trying to come up with solutions, for these trade-off paths. And I'm happy to revisit the documentation piece. Jody, I think you were giving some good feedback there as far as what we could do to clarify the language or get some predictability and consistency on number 3.
So if the locked one, I think there's elsewhere in the building code where it talks about unlocked in the direction of egress or something like that. Would that help clarify for the users maybe a little bit more? I don't want to start introducing language to building code, but I will say that we also had a question on that on a building permit we were looking at, and it was like, okay, this is a bedroom. Most bedrooms are locked from the inside. Is this okay or not okay because it is lockable, but it's not you wouldn't lock it from the outside and be stuck in the room.
Yeah, so there the intent of the phrase "be locked to prevent egress." So basically, like you said, Jody, that there's always a free egress from the inside out. So any language there that we can add to clarify that, I think that would be welcomed feedback.
Thank you all for that. Do we have any additional comments on this issue?
Can I just ask for clarification what the level of exit discharge is? Because from some of the comments I've heard and my previous understanding of this, it's a little bit different. So could someone, I don't know if Jody could or Tony could speak to that?
Yeah, so the intent there, great question, Abby. The intent there was to have the care facility on the level, typically at grade, where we're exiting directly out of that level. So as soon as we hit that exit element, we're out to grade and away from the structure.
Would that entail then if you had a split level home and care was provided on the where you have to go up. And then often those homes have another set of stairs leading from a deck. And would that be considered a level of exit discharge or not?
Yeah, it could be. If you had an exit element that led you from that level directly to discharge away from the structure, then yes, it would qualify as LED.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tony. Do you have any other additional comments to this issue? All right, so I'm not seeing any. Oh, Annalise.
All right, so let me ask this question. Child care programs that are already in existence are grandfathered in and do not need a sprinkler system, and they do not need the alternative. But if they did any sort of remodeling where they would need to obtain a building permit, would that trigger then that they would need would they then need a certificate of occupancy? Where then this would trigger the exits and all of that.
Thank you, Annalise. Tony, do you have any insight on that?
Great question there. No. So if it's already legally existing in operation, the intent was never to capture, facilities that are already operating, especially if they're just doing alterations. So assuming the work was subject to permit, regulatory oversight, you would go through and get the permit for the subject work, but there would not be any, retroactive application of these requirements for new facilities.
Annalise, go ahead.
Okay, I didn't understand that. So retroactive requirement for new facilities. What I was asking about was retroactive requirement for a childcare program. So like, for example, we have a childcare provider who is in Lynn County, and she's out in the county. In Lynn County, she asked to she got a building permit, or is in the process of getting a building permit to put up a pole barn. I have no idea what that is because I'm not like somebody that lives out in the rural area, right? So she wants to put up a pole barn. So Lynn County is saying now she needs to get an occupancy permit, and they're going to come out and inspect, and she needs to comply with these, either the sprinkler or the 3 alternative. And she's been living there. She's been doing childcare. Lynn County is saying, well, now you're operating illegally because we didn't come out and inspect. And now they're saying, well, so in addition, since now we've become aware of this, you need to upgrade your septic system because your septic system isn't likely up to being able to have a childcare center running out of your home. And so now we're going to need to inspect the septic system. And we also are going to need to apply all of these other R3 pieces, right? And these compliance pieces, right? Where the accessibility, ADA accessibility comes in. Well, she's living in an older home, right? This is a farmland. It's out there in the rural area. It's an older home. And it's not going to be compliant. The staircase going upstairs isn't going to be compliant. Now, kids aren't going to go upstairs unless they have to use the second bathroom, which is allowed by licensing rules, but isn't necessarily going to be allowed by this, because the only way out, she has to, in order to be licensed for 16, she has to have the second bathroom. The second bathroom is on the second floor, which is allowed by 329A. But if that bathroom is on the second floor and the only way down to grade, right, is to come out, exit the bathroom, come down the stairs, and then exit out, technically she wouldn't be able to meet this. So then the building code official in the Lynn County wouldn't be able to give her the occupancy permit because she doesn't meet the requirements.
So a couple of pieces there, and I'll try to answer them the best I can, and then please feel free to follow up. So the first thing is that if this was legally existing already as a child care facility in the home, and the local jurisdiction already recognized it as such, I think that was your initial question, was if alteration work was done, would that trigger application of the standards that we're talking about today? And that answer is no. So if it's already legally existing, and it was on record as being a child care facility, already licensed as such, there would be no, and that's what I meant by retroactive application. That wouldn't be the intent of these standards. In the examples you provide, I wasn't aware that, second story areas were going to be used. I think what we could look at there within the language that's provided, and again, we could welcome feedback on how to improve that language, is all rooms where care is provided are located on the level of exit discharge. So if we're only going up to the second floor to use a non-habitable space, such as a bathroom, and that's really the only purpose that we're ever going up to the second floor there, I think there's flexibility in the language to work on a creative solution on a site-specific basis in that case, because we're really not providing care in that room. But again, we welcome feedback on how to improve this language.
So then the other question then would be, and obviously it's being applied, and what they're saying, Tony, is that what Lynn County is saying to this provider is that she should have had an occupancy permit, but they're not recognizing that she moved in to live there and that that's the primary purpose. They're saying she's operating a childcare, and they're sort of ignoring the fact that she spends most of her time living there, right? That's the primary purpose. And so now they're saying that she's illegally living, or she's illegally operating the childcare from their perspective at the county level, because she didn't get the occupancy permit when she moved in to change the occupancy from living to doing childcare, as if childcare is the primary purpose for where she's living. And so that's the issue. Also, this person has children who are minor children One is a teenager, but fits into that 13 to 17 special needs category. So that child is considered actually a child care child for the purposes of enrollment and capacity and ratio. That child, because 329A allows the administrative rule, which says that household children do not, the rules do not apply to household children living in the home, except for the ratio, max capacity, and that they have to be signed in and out. So the minor children living in the home regularly during daycare hours go upstairs to their bedrooms. So there is technically care being given to children who are enrolled in the child care program, the provider's own child. And all the rules don't necessarily apply. So they can go up there and they can be out of sight and sound because they're household children. They can go up and be in the room, and so they are technically in care, but they are not clients. And because this is a residency first, they're allowed to be up on the second floor. But they are children in care, and so care is technically being given on the second floor. And then we have some childcare providers who do care in their basement, and they have an egress, a window or something that's a window, right, that meets the requirements that ELD requires in licensing rules. So it's like a secondary egress, but the primary way to get out is going up the stairs and exiting up the stairs, right? So would that, in the basement situation, if they didn't have a door down that goes directly out, can the window serve as that point of egress?
Not specifically in this language. So if care was provided in that space, there would need to be a qualifying exit from that space directly. Windows weren't qualified as exits. Typically, historically, in the building code side, they're not. They are, recognized for emergency escape and rescue purposes. But again, if that's a feedback or a recommendation, to add this to the language or add some flexibility in there, I'm sure we'd welcome that type of feedback. And then going back to the existing facilities, I don't think the intent was ever to apply this to existing licensed facilities. We put out several, technical bulletins trying to clarify that for folks. I think we even have one active currently that also touches on that. That was not the intent. We were trying to capture kind of a point in time forward for new licensed facilities.
So then again, my feedback to you then would be, if we're trying to go forward and we know that already existing programs, the majority of them can't do it, because how many childcare providers, ELD could probably tell you, decide to go out and build a new home to move their childcare into, and so they can do all of this right when it's being constructed. My guess is, I only know of one childcare provider in 6 years who is in the process of building a new home that she intends to do childcare in, and yes, she is installing sprinklers throughout the home. The new construction, that the home isn't even finished yet. So then if we know that almost all of these current providers wouldn't be able to meet this standard, how do we expect people who are childcare providers who are already living in a home, can't afford to move with housing prices and everything, who are renting their home, and the landlord is like, absolutely no, it's already hard enough for people to rent. This is only going to make it more difficult for people to find a rental that they can live in and do childcare in. And if this is their sole source of income because they're a single mom or a single dad with kids, and this is how they can make good money, right, and be home with their kids and not have to worry about paying for childcare as well, how do we expect, if currently licensed providers are saying there's no way this would work for me, I couldn't do this, how do we expect that new providers already in a home or searching for a home where they can start doing this, how do we expect them to be able to find a place to live and do childcare?
So I guess looking at the language, I'd kind of have a question and response, which would be, what could we do with the language in particular to improve it? or what would your feedback be to make that more of a solution, more of an achievable thing for these providers when they're looking for either an existing home where they plan to have a new care facility operation, or new construction, which is very rare for these facilities. What could we do here, and what in the language is difficult to achieve? Is it really that level of exit discharge piece? Is it also the number 2 as far as the proximity to a permanently installed cooking appliance? What kind of solutions there?
I think it is 1 and 2.
Okay.
I also think 3 is a problem for a brand new program. 3 is going to be the first hurdle, right? As we and Jody talked about, is going to be incredibly difficult. I guess what I'm seeing is that building codes work with the early learning division, and early learning division implemented some rules, which I participated in the fire safety rack. I had some feedback, but ultimately our union and providers that were there and providers that have given us feedback have said, yeah, okay, we can live with this stuff if it means that new providers or a current provider who's moving into a new home who then would be triggered to have to do this. And so we can live with these ELD rules. If those were implemented, why can't 420.11.2 just say, without automatic sprinkler system protection, that the provider must be in full compliance and demonstrate that full compliance to local building codes officials for the fire safety rules established under 329A administrative rules. So OAR 305 and 250.
Yeah, so I think that's the type of feedback that we're looking for. So again, providing that here on the record, as some feedback of potential solutions or amendments we can make to this language. So that proposal is basically just to refer back to those licensure rules. And that's really the nature of item 3. To give you background there, we went a little bit back and forth with ELD on what that language looks like, and also to the point that Jody brought up earlier on the timing of that documentation. We talked about whether there would be additional steps on their licensure side, to make sure that we could have something provided to the building official, building department locally, verifying that those more robust fire safety standards on the licensing side have been met. So it sounds like you're in alignment with that. Just we need to work on the language, in your opinion there.
Right. And I guess if someone's not applying for a building permit, something, they're not doing something to their property, if they don't need a certificate of occupancy, because that's for me, that would be the starting point, right? That if a certificate of occupancy is required by the local municipality, the local government entity, then documentation shall be submitted to the building official, which states the requirements have been met, period, or approved by the licensing authority, or will be, or should be approved by the licensing authority, whatever that is, right? But I guess for those building officials out there where in the county, as long as you're living in the daycare home and you don't need the certificate of occupancy, which is mostly historically why that triggers, right? The certificate of occupancy triggers because there's no one living in the home and the occupancy is changing from being a residence to being a non-residence where somebody is doing licensed family child care in. So I would argue that 3, you wouldn't even need to do the certificate of occupancy, because if the local municipality already has the occupancy permit requirement, that if you don't live in the home, they're not going to be able to get licensed. They're not going to be able to sign off until they've given the building code official. So I think the certificate of occupancy, if it's required, should be the trigger where you would give documentation to the building official. But if you don't need the certificate of occupancy, you're not going to give anything to anyone. So I think that rule could be rewritten, right? That's a express condition precedent, that certificate of occupancy, if that is needed, then you're going to provide documentation to a building official. But otherwise, building officials shouldn't be inspecting family childcare programs. That's licensing's role. Why would you have them come out and doing a second inspection and giving them control, which under 329A they shouldn't have, because no municipality should be able to say you can't do childcare there. They could refuse to certify and do the occupancy because somebody's not living there, and then licensing isn't going to give the occupancy permit, but licensing isn't going to give the license, but they should not be able to say, well, you can't do childcare there if there's no occupancy permit needed to be issued. Why would you even go to the local building people? Why would they inspect? I don't get that.
Yeah, so a couple of good points there. So just speaking from a purely technical code standpoint, anytime there's a change of character or use or occupancy, there is the expectation that you're going to notify the local building department. And I'll give you an example here. Another, common use of a dwelling is a live-work unit. Let's say I start a welding shop, out in my garage, a little woodworking facility out in my garage, and I welcome the public in. I have a live work unit. The base requirement is I'm absolutely going to be subject to a change of use or occupancy. And the base requirement has been for quite some time in the code is that I'm going to install sprinklers. I'm going to provide accessibility to the areas where the public are allowed. And so that's kind of a parallel on this. So I'm not sure if I'm following exactly about, the trigger for the change of occupancy. Now, if they're already legally existing licensed facilities, we're not intending that this impacts them. But again, if I'm taking my home and now I'm changing it similar to a live work unit, just like if I open my welding shop, now I have a business in the dwelling as well, that's a change of character or change of use of that R3 designation.
And there's no distinction in the building codes between change of use or just an additional use?
No, there's not. That's a great question, but no, there's not. So under the definition of change of occupancy, it includes a change of use or character. And then also in our chapter 1 language, it's, some very broad language, but it talks about, no owner or owner's agent shall, change the character, use, or occupancy of the building without, notifying the building department.
Okay, so is it possible to make a distinction then between a childcare being a family childcare, which the definition of family childcare, right, is somebody lives in the home and they're doing childcare. They are doing childcare for other people, a limited client base in the home, in their own home. And a distinction between that, right, where somebody's living there and they've added, they bring in clients and they do childcare. A distinction between that and where someone just goes rents or buys a home and they are not going to live there and they're going to just run a business out of that home. Is it possible to make that distinction with these rules?
So are you looking for those to be treated separately? As far as
that's what I'm asking, is that something that we should recognize? Is that something that we should do? Because here's the thing. If effectively these rules prevent most of the homes out there and available, which we know we have a housing crisis, if literally this stops most 80-90% of new applicants from opening a family childcare, and it worsens our childcare crisis, then what? Let me give you an example, because I can tell that you're like, wow, this is too broad. Let me give you an example. Let's say that because the state wants us, and there's a lot of new money to go open and expand. There are these millions of dollars in expansion grants. So let's say that I already own, because I already own a childcare in my own home, but let's say that I want to go open I'm going to get a second location, right? I'm going to go rent or purchase another home. And I mean, hopefully I can find a home that meets 1, 2, and 3, where I can do childcare. And then I guess some of the things, I mean, there are some issues that have come up with the bulletins. So then if the bulletin still applies to this, then there's more than 1, 2, and 3, because there's 1, 2, and 3, and then there's the requirements that municipalities are enforcing from the bulletin. But if I'm going to go find a house, what if I can't find a house that meets these requirements near, where I'm already at, because I'm not going to go from Gladstone to Beaverton, and oversee a program that's over in Beaverton. I want it to be fairly close so that I can, keep an eye on it. Can't be in 2 places at once. So then at that new location where I'm not living, I would have to get an occupancy permit. That's common sense. And then that would trigger this. But what if I wanted to move? What if I say, no, my house, I really have outgrown my house and I'd like to move into a larger home so that I can, instead of having 12 kids, I can have 16 kids and I can increase by 4 slots, right? Or what if I want to move and I want to have a second bathroom so that I can go from 15 to 16 and I can make a little more money, right? So I'm going to just go move to a new house. And I'm going to go in there and I'm going to live in that house. And that's what I'm moving in there to do, is to live in that house. But I'm also bringing in people to watch their kids. Those are two very different scenarios.
Annalise, let me make sure I'm understanding your, I guess, requested bifurcation of these 2 issues. So one is the permanently occupied residence that is their dwelling unit, they live there permanently, that is being used as a child care facility, and the others are dwelling units that are not occupied. The individual doesn't live there that runs that child care facility. Is that what you're trying to bifurcate?
Well, I'm wondering, one, is there, I think there could be an argument made that would be a reasonable bifurcation, and there would be reasonable cause to do so. And then if we do that, if someone's living there and that's their primary purpose, then if their local municipality says, well, we don't do occupancy permits because you're living there, I mean, then they shouldn't need to get an occupancy permit, right?
Occupancy permits happen whether you live there or whether you just work there or whatever. My question back would be, we would only need a bifurcation of application of the new rules if there was a safety difference in those 2. And to me, that sounds like it's the same level of safety. Maybe there's licensing reasons to have different rules applied, but from building official sort of perspective, we're looking at the life safety of it. And a house with a family has already been decided by the state and everybody else that it doesn't need sprinklers for you to have a single family house. It's the addition of the kids that they want to have some extra guidelines about. So to me, I don't care if somebody's spending the night, that like the family stays the night or not. It looks the same during the day because it's a kids and providers in a home setting, or kids and providers in a home setting in the other place where the kids leave and the provider spends the night. That seems the same safety-wise to me.
And Tony, correct me if I'm wrong. I think also the distinction comes in, you're inviting the public into your residence, essentially. You're inviting the public into your dwelling as part of your business. So the safety requirements change because of that too.
Yeah, that's correct, Tyler. And Jody summarized it perfectly. I mean, I think that's the difference here is that now it's not just a single family dwelling function. It's now something in addition to that, like my welding shop, like any live work unit where you're allowing the public to come in. Now it's serving a different function overall.
So thank you, Annalise, for the, oh, sorry, Steve, I do want to let you speak in just a moment. I just want to make sure Annalise knows we've captured her recommendations and her statements. If she has any additional comments, we'd welcome those. But Steve, I believe you've had your hand up.
Thanks. I wanted to just follow up with Tony, if I could, just to make sure the way we looked at these requirements. So I want to give a real concrete example. We received a concern about a childcare setting where the owner had converted their garage to a childcare space. And so it was a non-habitable garage. It got converted to habitable space for the purposes of childcare. And we looked at those kinds of situations where the other important factor about this case was that the childcare provider was licensed before the conversion happened. So this was an existing childcare facility. So it was an existing childcare facility where they did some work that required permit, converting the garage to a habitable space. The way we looked at this was that we exempted facilities that were already in place, already licensed before the rules required sprinklers or the temporary rules required these alternatives. But when that provider did additional work, we did apply the rules to it. We did apply the rules to that work, and that work she either had to get sprinklers or the temporary rules went into place just soon enough that she was able to take advantage of those. And because she had a door going right out to the driveway and walkway, she was able to avoid sprinklers and get the permit. But what I'm hearing is we may not have made the correct decision about that. It sounds like maybe the intent of that technical bulletin was to say, even when an existing provider does new work, that new work won't be required to meet these new rules. So I wanted to, I guess my comment would be anything we could do to clarify that, but I want to make sure I'm understanding that correctly. So maybe Tony could weigh in on that.
Yeah, great example, Steve. And I think we spoke about it. I think Jody brought it up in prior conversations as well. And obviously our tie back to this requirement for any existing building through the OSSC would be through Chapter 34. The intent, and I think the technical bulletins were trying to clarify that any licensed facility that's already existing, regardless of what's happening, that we weren't intending to impact their operation. So we weren't intending to, if you increase the area, have the application of, in that case, a 13D system, a partial 13D system to just a garage. But we talked about it quite a bit. And I think moving forward, that's what we're trying to clarify, through the committee work, the board recommendations, and, kind of application of Chapter 34.
Okay, so the intent is not to require an expansion that does need to be permitted, but it's not to apply these rules to that additional work.
Not if the facility's already licensed and running.
Okay.
That was the whole intent, was that if they're already up and running, they're already recognized as that we weren't trying to impact them in any way. And in this case, it sounds like this was, these 3 items, maybe not the 3rd item, but items 1 and 2 were very easily achievable in that design.
In that design, it really was. So that's really good clarification. I guess my recommendation would be to just really try to make that crystal clear. I know we met with our building official and Jody, and I don't think that was clear.
Okay. And I don't know that it totally makes sense either, actually, because so you've got somebody who's already got a let's say some sort of childcare facility. It is wherever it is. It's in the basement. It is, and they want to expand up to the 2nd floor, which wouldn't be allowed for a new facility. But because they already have a license, they get to do it, but somebody else doesn't. I don't feel like that's consistent.
Okay, so that's good input, Jody and Steve. So if we're going to clarify that, where would you recommend that we clarify it? Would it be good to add a pointer in chapter 4 to also tie it in that language in chapter 34?
I feel like the trickiness is in the new facility language that is in the scoping of ORSC. I feel like that language works only with as much of the interpretation bulletins as you can put out. Because is it new meaning new construction? Is it new meaning a new area? Or is it new as in a new provider in an existing home? What if somebody else was already doing it, but it's a different licensed person? And I know those bulletins are really helpful to explaining all those pieces, but it requires all of the bulletin and, maybe additional ones in the future for all these things we haven't thought up. So I think it would need to, I don't know where the best spot is to talk about what new means, because the way that I think the common sense reading of it is new means brand new, totally new facility, like totally new construction. So is it new if it's a provider moving into an existing home? Is that new? I think there's room to try to figure that out. So somehow talking about additions, existing construction, new areas, new habitable space, I don't know, something like that. Those terms are used elsewhere. So
okay.
I would just say again, and I know that in my initial testimony, I didn't mean in any way to indicate that these alternatives that are presented in this rule aren't really important. I think it really is important to have these alternatives to sprinklers. What I did mean to say, though, was notice all the, not that any code development process isn't challenging, but notice how challenging this is. I'm hearing economic arguments, which I've heard from many of our customers as well. I'm hearing lots of need for clarification and some confusion about what existing is. And again, I know that we're in a very narrow rulemaking process here, but I also note the state did put this requirement on pause for a while. And I think this is an opportunity to rethink whether we need to go down this path at all. Are these fire sprinklers or alternatives so important? Is there such an existing problem that we need to take these home-based businesses and lump them in with requirements that are normally reserved for sort of commercial structures and enterprises? Yes, they're a business, but they are a home-based business. And I know this is a narrow process, but I just would encourage whatever thought can be given to that to be given to it, because it's a significant thing for a jurisdiction to implement. And I don't think we're going to be able to go out and do a certificate of occupancy for existing properties where nothing is changing except for the additional use of childcare. I think that's going to be really hard to manage just logistically. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you for all the feedback. We really appreciate that. And just for a reminder to individuals commenting in the chat, if you could please just state your comments on the record, because the chat does not get captured on the record. We would greatly appreciate that, because we do want to hear your feedback. So it sounds like we have several recommendations as to how the language could be amended in a variety of ways. Do we have anybody that feels that these proposed rules do accurately implement the temporary rule and board-approved code amendments? Annalise, do you have your hand up?
Yeah, in the chat, I had asked, so it's and Cheryl Flick had answered me. So in an I-4 occupancy, would a commercial childcare, at what point would a commercial childcare need sprinkler systems?
Not required. It's not required where the I-4 daycare facilities are at the level of exit discharge, and where every room where care is provided has not fewer than one exterior exit door. And then it also gives in buildings where group I-4 daycare is provided on levels other than the level of exit discharge, an automatic sprinkler system in accordance with 903 shall be installed on the entire floor where care is provided, all floors between the level of care and the level of exit discharge, and all floors below the level of exit discharge other than areas classified as an open parking structure. So it kind of gives you a little bit there, but.
Thank you.
Okay, do we have any additional feedback on this first issue? All right, I am not seeing anyone else. So with that, I think we will be moving on to issue number 2. So if you look below in your packets, there is some amended language for the ORSC, specifically a pointer to the OSSC. We are asking feedback from this committee as to whether or not that language sufficiently alerts someone consulting the code that they may need to consult the OSSC if the occupancy of their building is one of the impacted child care facility types. So the Oregon Residential Specialty Code is being amended to include a pointer to the OSSC for child care facilities located within dwellings, which are included in the proposed OSSC rules, as you can see. The division would like feedback as to whether or not the proposed amendments and pointer are sufficiently clear to direct individuals referencing the ORSC, to the correct governing code. So if anyone has feedback on this issue, please feel free to raise your hand or speak up.
This is Annalise. I raised my hand when you're looking like you're still trying to see if anybody raised their hand.
Please, go ahead.
So I have some questions around this, if it's sufficiently clear to someone if they're consulting the OSSC code. So the language now states that in the change with the initial change, that childcare programs that are rated, that are licensed for 10 or 16 children, up to 16 children, are an R3. But in everything that I've been able to find, it says that R3 was not adopted. So where I think it's not clear where the rest of the requirements for an R3 are, and if they apply to a childcare program. I think that's not clear at all. And then again, chapter 11, it is not clear. It is not clear at all to childcare providers nor to multiple municipalities what parts of chapter 11 specifically apply to a childcare program that's located within the family home that is now an R3.
So Annalise, I believe you're referring specifically to the OSSC changes. Just to clarify, the issue that I was discussing was the ORSC, but your question is understood. And if Tony, you have any follow-up on that or any response, please feel free. Otherwise, we will take that under advisement.
Sure. On the first part there, Annalise, I wasn't quite following about the R3 reference and R3 not being adopted, but on the accessibility, maybe we can circle back to that. On the accessibility, just like we require for live work units, there is a provision up front in Chapter 11. I can scan and find it real quick. I want to say it's in the scoping of Chapter 11 regarding daycare facilities. It's 1103.2.12. Where a daycare facility is part of a dwelling unit, only the portion of the structure utilized for the daycare facility is required to comply with this chapter. So part of the research that our technical team did, again, trying to get the technical language accurate and correct, as we looked through publications that are posted by U.S. Department of Justice, the U.S. Access Board. And these are the daycare facilities, home-based businesses in general are considered places of public accommodation. And so they're definitely covered by the federal ADA. And then we have a statute here in Oregon that requires us at the Building Code Division to adopt construction standards that are consistent minimally with that federal ADA. And so that was the tie back. We were trying not to be specific because, again, depending on the specific building in question, the project in question, whether it's an existing building or not, the application is going to be different, right? If we're building it for new, which I think you've commented earlier is very rare, there's going to be more application of the Chapter 11 requirements, whereas if we have an existing facility, there's a path through Chapter 34 as well as ORS 447-241. And so that's the accessibility piece. On the R3 piece, I think that's great feedback. I think we could add that to the language in the pointer of the ORSC there shall be classified as group R3 to prevent other occupancy classifications being assigned.
Okay, so again, just to feed off of that. So what I'm saying is that ORSC says that we're going, if we're a CF or an RF, we're going to be rated an R3. And at what rule number did you say discusses what an R3 is and has to comply with?
Oh, so for the occupancy classifications, you're going to be in Chapter 3 of the OSSC. And specifically, it's in 310. I want to say it's 310.4, but let me look. Yes, it's residential group R3, right. Section 310.4.
Right. And then 1103 says if you're one of these R3s, then for childcare specifically, your licensed space has to be compliant. Well, it doesn't even say licensed space, right? It says spaces used for childcare. So that's your kitchen, your bathrooms, your living room, your childcare exclusive use, but most people don't use exclusive use. So they're using just their house, right? So if you potentially use the entire house, then your entire house would have to be compliant. But what I'm saying is if you're an R3 and you have to comply with OSSC R3, where are what you have to comply with? Is it only the sprinkler codes? I mean, that's not what's not clear to providers and to municipalities. Is it only the sprinkler code or the alternative to the sprinkler code, or is it to all R3? Is there a place to find all R3? Because there was, when you were doing this in April 21, there was I think it was like Appendix G or something that listed like R3 designation, what codes they had to follow, but that was not adopted. So what else, with being an R3, what else do people need to do besides the sprinkler issue?
So good question. And so we can look at, it's in the packet for this meeting. So if you look at the proposed code amendments for the 2019 OSSC, So the key there, we tried to keep consistent language throughout all of those proposed amendments that are currently temporary amendments and active today, is that you would comply with the residential code provision. So you'd be constructed in accordance with the residential code, provided that you meet the 420.11 section that we've been talking a lot about, in particular 420.11.2, to omit the requirement of sprinklers. And then also you meet Chapter 11 of the OSSC for the functions served. So you'd meet accessibility provisions as required for the project, whether it be existing and you're not doing any alterations, but just a change of occupancy, or if you're doing a brand new build, it's going to vary. And then otherwise, you're just meeting the residential code construction standards.
Right. So again, I really feel like, especially for providers who are moving into an existing home and not doing new construction, there is nothing in Chapter 11 that is specific that says, there's no provision that I could find that says childcares have to comply with this. There's a lot of requirements, especially around ADA accessibility, but what ones specifically do childcare providers who already live in the home and have already been living in the home, what do they have to qualify if they want to start doing childcare? What do they have to follow under Chapter 11?
Sorry, I'm muted there. So again, the charging section to reference would be 1103.2.12. And then for any existing building, we would always start, compliance as far as Chapter 11 goes through Chapter 34. And we have longstanding amendments there where a change of occupancy occurs, where no alterations occur, then essentially nothing is required as far as accessibility is concerned. So if we just had our existing building and we just changed the occupancy, I can give you that reference. It's currently an amendment to the IEBC. One thing we're really looking forward to in this upcoming 2022 iteration is that it'll be integrated in with the IEBC. So we're pretty excited about that. Trying to get to it on the fly here. Excuse the pause. So it would be under Section 3403, Chapter 34, modifies IEBC Chapter 3, Section 305.4, change of occupancy. Existing buildings that undergo a change of group or occupancy shall comply with this section unless additions or alterations are made to the building or facility. Change in use or occupancy alone shall not require compliance with the provisions of Chapter 11 of the building code, this code, the OSSC. So in that case, if no work was done, then that would be the starting place. And again, it would vary based on the project specifics of the building.
I think, Tony, to sort of capture, I think what Annalise is saying also regarding, the application of these for local jurisdictions, I think the Building Codes Division will definitely take under advisement, providing additional materials to make sure that these are clearly understood, just because I think as a general matter, that's very helpful. All right, so does anyone else have any comments on issue number 2, specifically the ORSC pointer, and whether that sufficiently alerts someone consulting the code that they may need to consult the OSSC? Then alternatively, let me ask this question. Does the committee feel that the ORSC language is sufficiently clear to direct someone to the OSSC if they are consulting the code in regards to one of the impacted childcare facility types?
I would just reiterate that I feel like there needs to be some work done about the new and what that extends to. If it's not here in the scoping, where is it? I think that would be helpful for consistent application across the state.
Thank you, Jody. Do you have any other feedback from the committee?
This is Annalise. I just think some provider, if you got a new provider, they're going to need to go find an attorney to help them wade through this. This is, I mean, it's just because it's just layer upon layer upon layer, where you start with the ORSC, and then you go to the OSCC, and then you go back to the ORSCC, and then you go to chapter 11, and then you go to 340, and you're just, this is so complex. I do not know how the state of Oregon could expect any of its citizenry, its taxpayers, to be able to wade through this. And I don't know how any person wanting to start a childcare business from this point on would even entertain trying to do something in their home, unless they just went in and did illegal childcare off the radar and just stayed off the radar. This is an incredibly technical barrier. And anyone who's putting in a license application, which is certainly not expensive, so it's, I mean, because it's non-refundable. So you're going to, you know, you can give the $21 or $22 or $32 or whatever it is, and just walk away from it if you need to. But I just cannot stress how incredibly disheartening it is to hear so many people saying, well, I wanted to do it, but this was so overwhelming to me. I just said, screw it. I'll just go do something else. And that's what I'm seeing right now. That's what we're hearing from so many people who want to open a childcare program in their home because they don't have the wherewithal or don't want to run a commercial center. And they're just saying, you know, screw it, because this is too much.
Thank you for that feedback. All right, so does anyone else have any comments on issue number 2? I am not hearing anyone, so why don't we proceed then into issue number 3, discussion of potential fiscal impacts and economic impacts of the proposed rules. So just as some background, with any rulemaking, the division is required to make a particular note of potential fiscal impacts and economic impacts that might result from the new rules. The division would welcome any input from the committee on the nature and extent of any fiscal or economic impact that may be caused by these rules. So some examples of those might be additional costs or requirements on local municipalities, additional costs or requirements on particular types of businesses, and will the new rules require additional training to implement, comply with, or enforce? Will the new rules make particular actions or products more or less expensive? And these are just some examples and shouldn't be considered the only types of fiscal or economic impacts. So do members of the committee have thoughts on potential fiscal or economic impacts? I know we've heard a few, but do you have any additional comments on those? Jody, please. I think you're on mute, Jody, sorry.
Just to list them the way, you know, from my perspective, which is not as a provider, it's as a regulatory agency. First of all, we're requiring permits where we didn't require permits before. So obviously that's a cost to the daycare provider that they didn't have before. We weren't requiring building permits for any daycares that were registered or certified. No, yeah, we obviously the centers, the commercial ones, but neither of the home-based ones required permits. So that's a cost. 2, it's a cost for the applicant to have to do these, to put their information together, but also we're looking at how can we minimize what the permitting process looks like? Does it have to follow the regular building permit process if it is just a change of use and all somebody's looking for is, does it meet 1, 2, and 3? Can we get a piece of paper? Like, so the time and process changes that have to happen to make that sort of expediting is maybe the wrong word, but ease through the system happen would be something else that we're incurring. And I see Steve's hand, so maybe I'll hand it over to him.
Please, Steve, go ahead.
I think Jody's perspective is really well taken, and she knows better than I. I'm not a plan reviewer, but a couple of thoughts I have is that to Annalise's point, it is challenging to jump between those codes, and the commercial code is a serious code. The OSSC is a serious code, very difficult for homeowners who have not been, who don't have a lot of experience in the building world and the building regulatory environment to navigate that. So then what are they going to have to do? They're going to have to hire a professional to help them even understand what they need to comply with. We've seen that firsthand, and I know the next item is going to be equity impacts. And one thing, this is probably more indicative of the adult care world, but I think it's probably true of the child care world too. We have a lot of speakers of us who speak English as a second language. So trying to read these really complex regulatory and technical documents and navigate between them, it's like all of chapter 11. Wow, and there's probably some easy and quick places they could go, but it's just, I can tell you, because what I do for the Bureau is compliance work. And my team tries to help people through these processes. And I can tell you, it has just been really challenging with these. The other thing I'll just note, and maybe Jody could speak to this better, is that some of the workarounds, and they're very important, but some of them may trigger other requirements as well. So if all of a sudden we're trying to put a new door in for a level of exit discharge, and that triggers shear requirements and or an engineer to certify that that the shear hasn't been impacted or there's enough. All of a sudden, what seems like a small thing can become a really expensive thing. So I don't know how often that would happen, but it's the example of kind of knock-on effects that all of a sudden for the owner, things just really blossom and become very complex and expensive. So those are the kinds of things that I think we need to be thinking about.
I appreciate that feedback. Thank you so much, Steve. And Amy Shaw, you have your hand up.
Yes, I just want to point out that as far as childcare is, as of right now, we're in a severe childcare desert. And this economically for both the potential childcare providers that are going to be doing it in their home and the families that need care is going to be so detrimental, because this is basically no one's going to want to facilitate taking on the expenses that it would incur to have a new license. So you're taking so many potential childcare provider perspectives out of the economy, basically, because nobody is going to financially be able to do this. And I think that needs to be, notated, that this is going to dramatically impact the number of providers that we're going to see coming into the workforce for childcare, let alone how many may quit because they do want to move, not just for their business, but because of their family expansion. It's a huge economic burden.
Thank you for that feedback, Amy. Annalise, you have your hand up?
Yes. I just want to say that under the temporary rules, what we are seeing are extra delays of about 4 to 6 to sometimes 9 to 10 weeks, where a program has gotten all set up, because you have to be all set up before the visit, before your licensing visit. So you have the pack and plays, you have the high chairs, you've purchased all of this stuff. Nobody, unless somebody has 8 to 10 kids of their own, like at one time, so like octuplets or something like that, you don't have enough cribs, you don't have enough high chairs, you don't have enough equipment, you don't have enough bottles, you don't have enough toys and things like that, materials. So you have to go out and purchase all of those things. There's to start a childcare is a huge startup cost. Unless you're going to do a small registered family, you're going to start with 1 or 2 kids, then you're going to build up to 5 or 6. There is a huge startup cost. And if you're going to have staff as a certified family childcare program with more than 10 kids, you are likely going to have to hire a staff person. Well, you've got to pay them to be training, and they're sitting there and right now it's impossible to find staff. So what happens is if you can't get your program up and running because you've either got to do the sprinkler system, which is just, I'm willing to state for the record that I guess, because the sprinkler system rule is so bad and so detrimental. At this point, I guess we'd take anything, right? Throw us a bone doesn't mean it's great, but at least I guess it's an option that might let 1 or 2 people through the door. And that's unfortunate, right? Because what we're really saying is the sprinkler system rule is the problem. So this would have been better done back in April of 2021, truly in a public way. And let's argue here that state building codes, their union has asked me, and it would have been nice if one AFSCME member to another could have said, hey, this is happening. You might want to come to this public meeting that's online. But staffing, if you find somebody, you have to start paying them or they're going to go someplace else. And you cannot start having children and families apply to your program until you have your staff. So you have startup costs, you have staffing costs, you have the insurance that you have to get, you have all these payments, and you are sitting here. We've had providers who've been sitting there for 3 or 4 months while they go through this process, and they are bankrupted before they can actually get their license because of all the ongoing costs that have nothing to do with getting the occupancy permit or the sprinkler or doing the costs of the workarounds. They just simply, what used to take 6 weeks, 4-6 weeks, is now taking 4 months. They can't. The whole thing it's like a house of cards that you kind of have to carefully construct to get your business off the ground and then try to get in the black as quickly as possible so that you can afford to stay open. And what we're seeing is, even with the temporary rules, programs that are trying to get off the ground and cannot get off the ground, they cannot financially sustain themselves in that lag period. So obviously the sprinklers are too high. These costs to do the financial cost to actually have the exit, not have it going through your kitchen, not having it go through a locked room, but and having it directly exit out. Hoping that even though you're using the bedroom, that'll work. It's just the costs of actually maintaining the business during the startup phase, and that prolonged startup phase that has a serious financial impact on people who are trying to open their business using a credit card or trying to just spend as little as possible so they can get some clients, because it's when you get those first few clients that you actually have some income to actually make these things happen. And let's remember that the majority of people who are opening childcare businesses for the first time are women, largely on public assistance. So they, and I believe the latest figures are that 74% of in-home family childcare providers, RFNCF, actually qualify for OHP. So they're fairly low income, right? And then they're supposed to float while all of this happens, and these don't happen quickly. And have to wait for a building inspector to come out and approve the occupancy so that you can get your licensor to come out to approve the licensing aspect of it, in the end means that a lot of providers can't make it. They've got to stop the licensing process and they have to go. So far, what we're seeing with these temporary rules, they're having to stop the licensing process. They're having to quit that. They're having to give it up and go back out and go find a job instead of open a childcare business. And then a question that I have with this is, does the technical bulletin workarounds, if these rules pass permanently, what about the workarounds that were in the technical bulletin where you need the engineer to come in and do the fire safety breaks between like the kitchen and the rest of the building and between the garage where you've got daycare space and you've got living space, and they're sort of the same space, but they're sort of not. So the building person is saying that they're not the same space. Does that, all that, the workarounds in the technical bulletin, do those go away if these rules are implemented? Because those are very expensive too.
Thank you, Annalise, for that feedback. Tony, do you have any response to that?
Yeah, so the previous technical bulletins have been pulled from the webpage, and those examples, I think, that are being referred to as workarounds. So the examples of possible alternate methods, those were just when the sprinkler system was the only was the base prescribed requirement of the code, and now since these temporary code amendments have been implemented, obviously we have this section 420.11.2 in those options there in lieu of providing the sprinkler system. Now, always local building officials always retain the discretionary authority to even entertain alternate methods, to that application of section 420.11.2. So yes, those technical bulletins have been since pulled that were giving examples of potential alternate method considerations.
Amy Shaw, I believe you still have your hand up.
I just also had another question in regards to, a lot of these are going to cause extra costs for new providers and that kind of stuff. Has anything been considered in regards to getting these providers grants or assistance in getting this done so that they can open? And then another question is, has a financial review been done to see exactly how much it's going to cost a potential provider to go into an existing building home and have somebody come in and put sprinklers? Because I can only imagine that's tens of thousands of dollars. And like Annalise said, for the vast majority of us, we're not rich, and we're not doing this to become rich. We're doing this to stay home with our kids. We're doing this to, we start as doing it to be with our kids, and then we find that we have a passion for it, and we go on to help other families grow their families. And our taxes don't reflect that we make a lot of money, because we do, thankfully get some write-offs, but to go and get a loan, a business loan, any type of loan, to cover the expenses that I can only imagine it will be for that sprinkler system, or even some of, the ADA type stuff and the other, even a couple $1,000s for most of these people is too much. It's too much. So I'm wondering, is there anything that has been looked into as far as that is? Like for grants, assistance, and then the actual cost, because I think that isn't being stated. Like, if this is going to cost a potential provider $30,000 to $60,000 to go into their existing home and put sprinklers or whatever it may be, or even $10,000, that's a make or break for, I couldn't, there's no way. I'm just thankful that I'm grandfathered because I couldn't afford to do these things at this point in time. And I've been doing childcare for 11 years and this would close me.
Thank you, Amy. I'm not certain the answer to your question. However, as part of this process, there are several stages of fiscal impact discussions, and that's the reason this question exists as part of this rulemaking committee or rule advisory committee, excuse me, is to be asking those questions and getting that valuable feedback from people like you. So we appreciate that. All right, do we have any additional feedback regarding potential fiscal or economic impacts? All right, thank you for that feedback on that issue. And then let's move on to the final issue, issue number 4. Specifically, we would like feedback on what are the potential impacts on racial equity in the state. And with any rulemaking, the division is required to make particular note of any potential impact on racial equity in the state that might result from these new rules. The division would welcome any input from the committee on the nature and extent of any impact these rules may have on racial equity in Oregon. So if you would like to speak on this issue, please feel free to raise your hand or speak up. Annalise, please go ahead.
So statistically, we know that the majority of Black and Hispanic providers, Arabic, Vietnamese, providers of color, and who are generally women as well, tend to be renters and not have home ownership and not have a good path to home ownership here in Oregon. As such, if they're renting, and we know that the renter bill failed a couple of times, it's hard to find a landlord who will allow you to rent and run a childcare out of there. It is likely that that having option A or B will deter landlords from renting to women of color primarily, but maybe women and white women too, and men who want to do childcare. This will deter landlords from wanting to rent to people who are indicating that they will do family childcare out of the home. And it will also make it, there's a barrier if you do not own that home to being able to necessarily make modifications, either for the sprinkler system or for the alternatives, I think it was Stephen that pointed out that this may trigger additional, if you have to make modifications to comply with 1, 2, or 3 of Part B there, that it would be not only cost prohibitive, but likely impossible for a renter to get that done, or to ask their landlord to do, and their landlord would likely say no. So I think this will certainly disproportionately affect women or people of color.
Thank you for those comments, Annalise. And I believe, Jody, did you have something to say?
Yeah, I don't have the statistics. I was wondering if somebody else in the room did, about 1, how many providers were people of color, but 2, how many in home-based care versus center-based care, because it's the small business startup situation. I'm also curious about the people needing childcare. How many go to home-based care versus the commercial center-based care? And remember, I forget who, maybe it was Amy talking about how we're in a childcare desert. So we're already low. So when there are spots available, who gets them first? And what price point goes to which folks? I don't have any of those numbers. I was wondering if maybe that childcare deserts report had some of that more specific information. But one, that these rules are better than what we had prior to the temporary rules. So I feel like in that way, like this is better for encouraging home-based care than just the pure sprinkler rules, for sure. But in terms of winding the clock back a year, I don't know which direction you want the impacts on. I think you can kind of see and hear from the different groups, but also that it was providers and people needing care, and then the home-based versus the commercial.
Thank you very much, Jody. Stephen, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I think all those things that Jody talked about would be good research to do for economic impact. I just want to state that again, my experience is more extensive with the adult care world, but what we were noting is that for providers who, there are a lot of providers who need to rent. That's what I'm hearing Annalise say. And in those situations where they're renting, when we announced they would have to provide sprinklers or an alternative, landlords were almost 100% unwilling to make those changes. So that would all have been at the expense of the child care owner or the adult care owner. And more often than not now, owners who are renting space are treating those leases very much like commercial leases with sort of TI, you're responsible for every maintenance issue at the property kind of thing. And that is very overwhelming for providers who are just trying to start a business, being responsible for all that. So that's not to mention that when that provider leaves that residence, then the owner has the benefit of all those changes that the occupant paid for without having paid for anything. So I just think that there really is a barrier for people that need to rent space there because they don't have the same level of control over that space, and they're unlikely to get help from the folks they're renting from.
Thank you very much for that feedback. All right, do we have anyone else that wishes to speak on issue number 4, potential impacts on racial equity?
I just want to say that the Office of Child Care does have some statistics on certified family, registered family certified center, and capacity across the state. So if that's something that would be useful to you, we are more than happy to share any data collection that we have on that.
Thank you very much for that feedback, Abby. If you'd like to send that in, we'd certainly take a look at that and take it under advisement as far as this process goes. That's why we invite everyone here to speak their minds and provide their feedback. It's very much appreciated. Do we have any additional comments on issue number 4? I am not hearing anyone speaking up. So on that note, we very much appreciate your participation and your feedback on this, this set of issues and this particular rulemaking issue. And next steps will be, we'll take these comments under advisement and discuss them internally. And then if there is any rulemaking that will continue from this point, there will be public hearings for those, and we welcome your participation at those as well if they do take place. So thank you all very much for participating. We appreciate it, and have a wonderful day.